Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today we're showing off another deck profile. This time it's Vanquish Soul. This is quite literally like my favorite deck that's been released in quite some time. It's by far my favorite deck to play at the moment. It is such a cool deck. I think there's an argument that like since Sky Strikers, this is the most competitively relevant, like legit control deck that wasn't like, that's more like resource oriented and not as much of like a trap deck like Labyrinth. It really is a cool deck. I love the way it was designed. I think Konami did a phenomenal job in that way. I love that it's like kind of based off of like a like fighting game. Ideally, it has some cool, you know, callbacks to that kind of thing, and it's just so cool. So yeah, here's my build. I'm actually going to show you a main, extra, and side for what I have here early on in testing. We'll get to the rest of that. We'll get to the rest, you know, a little bit later on. But yeah, without further ado, let's just jump into this thing. This deck is so freaking cool. I love it. I cannot say that enough. Okay, so starting off here, we start out with our main monster, triple copies of Vanquish Soul Raisin. He is by far your most important monster. He is your centerpiece as far as your main deck monsters are concerned. He's very important. Yeah, there's not much else to say about him. He searches any monster, and the way they design these bonus effects is so cool. Where like, if you meet the requirements for their best ones, they really are nice effects, but they're not always guaranteed, and I think that's a really healthy balance that they kind of built into the deck, which is really cool. He has the ability to like pop any other monsters in his column by revealing a fire and a dark. He can also make himself indestructible by card effects by revealing just a fire. That one doesn't come up as often, but the other one definitely does all the time. That is a very consistent piece of interruption that you make use of in this deck. This card is so cool, really. All right, moving on. Triple copies of the other Stratos in the deck. Triple copies of Vanquish Soul Dr. Mad Love. This card's also really nice. It searches a spell or trap in the archetype. It can reveal a dark to make face-up monster your opponent controls lose 500. That one again doesn't really come up that often. Or you can reveal a fire and a dark and an earth to bounce the monster on the field with the lowest defense stat on the field. I really like that because this card's already 2000. The Link doesn't have a defense. Raisins 1500, and 1500 is about as low as it gets. So as long as your opponent puts a monster with less than 15, this is a viable bounce. And that's another thing too. Of all the removal this deck has access to, literally none of it targets. Literally not a single one. So that's like another really strong piece of their utility there as well. So really cool. All right, moving on. One copy of Pantera. I like this card a lot. This card is super important because it allows you to play around certain board states, stuff like your opponent trying to remove your normal summon before you get to the Link is very important. So it's an extender in that regard, but if this card didn't exist, you may not even play rank 4s in the deck because you kind of need a card like this to be able to facilitate rank 4s. And it has the same effect Raisin has as far as popping monsters in its column, except back row. So this card isn't out to floodgates. It's just a super important utility card in the deck, and so you have to play it. Not much else to say about it. It's a really important card, for sure. Okay, here's where we get questionable. I'm on 2 copies of Borger and 1 copy of Pluton. I am 50-50 right now on whether you play 2 and 1 or just 3 of Borger and just completely cut out the Pluton. The last duel I played, I literally saved my own Heine by playing the Pluton. It was like to get Raisin's effect to pop in the columns, and if I didn't have Pluton as a search target, I literally wouldn't have gotten that, and I would have lost because I wouldn't have had that last little line of interruption to save my Heine. So that's why I'm 50-50. Borger is by far the better card. In fact, Pluton's literally the worst Vanquish Soul card you actually even consider playing, but it is a fire target. It's a name. It allows Raisin to get you a fire, so all you have to do is have a dark in hand, and Raisin can get his effect live. That's really what it's mainly for. I'm still on the fence about it, but yeah. And then Borger's like insane. It's literally Heat Soul in archetype combined with Lycoris. It's insane. This is the best Lycoris ever made, and Lycoris was pretty insane at the time. And the last Vanquish Soul monster he plays 2 copies of Caesar Valius. This is pretty standard. He's a really good card. I mean, he's a 3k beater. He helps you dodge certain targeting effects. He can make himself a towers for a turn, and he can also non-target pop a card if you get all the attributes set up in your hand. It's a nice card. There's a world where you play one of this for sure. I'm just not sure if that world is right now. But we'll see. It's definitely something I'll consider because I don't find myself making his pop effect alive super early in duels. So I could easily see myself playing like 3 border 1 of him and just kind of trying to save him in the deck. Because when you get later in the duel, he's really awesome. But earlier on, he's just okay. All right, that's it for your Vanquish Soul monsters. Into the generic stuff, and this will give you a hint at the type of build I am playing here. But we are on 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. 1 copy of Doggeran for your fire attributes. Very cool. You have to play the right attributes because you need to get those reveal effects online. Aside from just searching your own Vanquish Soul cards, it's not enough. You need those generic cards to make those live. Plus, Doggeran comes up very importantly for another card down the line. So that's it for the fires. Didn't want to play too many, but I felt like 4 was a good number. For darks, we play 2 Magnemute and a Druid's Worm. That's all I play for darks, but this is still fine. I like these a lot. Your Link 1 is a dark, so it's actually quite easy for you to put a dark in grave overall, so I like that a lot for these. And, you know, I really don't like playing these cards, at least in a deck that can facilitate them themselves. That's really the first prerequisite I look for in a deck to consider playing Viscerals, especially in the main. And this is a good lineup. In fact, especially with like Mad Love being a level 4, I almost consider playing like Chaos Angel in the extra, just because 6/4. And even some other dragon cards in the extra for this lineup, but that's something we'll talk about when we get there. Moving on, we move to the Earth targets. Only 2. Earth is by far the least important attribute, but for stuff like Caesar Valius, it does still matter to get an Earth in hand at times, so I do play 2. I opted not to play Fenrir. I thought Fenrir made a lot of sense. I think in a vacuum, when you're just looking at synergy between Fenrir and this deck, it makes a lot of sense. But then when you really look at the nitty gritty of the competitive scene, it makes you lose to Droll and Lockbird way harder, as well as Nibiru way harder. And that's just not something we really want to risk, is a deck that beats Nib 100% of the time, playing the Nib sometimes because you open Fenrir. That's not what we want, and we also don't want to lose to Droll because we go Fenrir Search, and then we're locked out of our entire engine from there. So just go Spell. I know it's not the greatest in certain matchups like Kashtira, but it's good enough versus a wide variety of stuff aside from that I think it's still good enough. And then for the non-attribute monsters, 3 copies of Droll. The idea with Droll is very simple. This is a very, very mid-range, like resource-oriented deck, and so the decks that you lose to the hardest are the decks that have the higher ceilings, and when they pop off, they just completely run you over, whether it's going second and they just barrel right through you and kill you, or it's you're going second and they just make an insane board. Either way, this card is a good card at limiting the ceiling of any of those decks that are like way higher ceiling than yours. So that way you can kind of get them into a more simplified board state, and that is where this deck thrives. So even though it doesn't share attribute, I do think it makes a ton of sense in a deck like this. And the last 2 monsters I played was 2 Effect Veiler. A couple reasons for the Veilers. It's a small world, bridgeable card that way, as well as being another monster that we could draw off of Borger on the opponent's turn and still be live. It is by far the worst monster of the hand trap lineup we have here, but there really weren't a ton of things that I felt much stronger about. Obviously, I love Imperm more than this card, just in a vacuum, but when we're talking about, you know, some synergy with some of the other cards that are important in the deck, that's where this card kind of is worth it a little bit more, in my opinion. Still not great. You definitely can side it out in a lot of situations, but just still important to have at least, you know, in the main deck, I think. All right, now we get to the spells. Triple copies of Stake Your Soul. I do not have the other 2 copies yet. They are in the mail. They will be here soon. You have to play it. Nothing crazy here. That's why we play all the generic cards that have attributes. That way, an Ash Blossom plus this card is still Raisin, right? Or a Bestial plus that card is a Mad Love or whatever. You know what I mean? It's really, really good. 1 Rhoda. It's just a 4th copy of Raisin, or you could call it a 7th copy of Raisin if you count Stake Your Soul. And Triple Small World, it's just your 8th, 9th, and 10th copies of Raisin if you count everything else. Usually it's just getting you Raisin, but there are definitely scenarios where it's getting you a Borger if you didn't already have access to Borger. It's getting you Mad Love. It's getting you some other stuff in certain scenarios. Maybe even a Droll if you know it's really good in the matchup. Just pick a hand trap you really want if you have a bridge for it, and you're good to go. This is why you play Doggeran, because with Ash Blossom in hand, Doggeran is your best, most generic, like still a decent card to have in the main deck kind of card that can bridge you into Raisin. This is the idea. This is just more copies of Raisin. Your deck is immensely better if you draw Raisin, even if he gets negated, because at least you go normal Raisin, he has to be responded to, he has to be negated if your opponent can, and then you just go, okay, rock, add him back, and then we'll summon him on your turn too, and he'll search Borger on your opponent's turn. If you have a dark already, then boom, we're already drawing, and like, it's like your opponent negates you with one card, they go -1 from the hand, and you still end up in the long run going like +2 off of that interaction. It's broken. It's really broken. So there's that. And then for the rest of the Vanquish Soul spells, I play 2 Continue. This is pretty standard. A lot of people playing 2 Continue. I like this quite a bit. This card's really good, especially with like Raisin and some of their, specifically Raisin and Pantera, being able to put them into the specific columns you want to get their removal effects at opportune times. It's really good. And I did play 2 Dust Devil. I've been messing with 2 Dust Devil. I know some people don't love it. This deck is so grindy, and I find myself resolving Mad Love like multiple times in some duels, and the second Dust Devil has already come up for me. It's a really good card. It's a good interruption, and I just don't even think it's that bad to draw. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. I think this card's just really powerful. You know, and I think it's totally fine to play it too. Easy side out if you think it's just fine in a matchup, but I actually kind of like maining 2 here. And the last card in the main is Tikaboo. I know some people aren't going to like this as a pick for the format, as well as, you know, as being a floodgate, and people don't like floodgates. But I do think overall this card's quite powerful, and I think there are enough matchups where this card does enough work. And even the decks where it doesn't like destroy, it still like is going to limit their ceiling. Kind of same idea as Droll. Even if it's not an auto win, though there are still matchups where like this card hinders enough of their plays and forces them into awkward lines enough where the fact that this deck doesn't end on a million interruptions can still be enough, because they have to do awkward lines instead of their standard lines under something like Tikaboo. So I'm maining it. I would recommend at least siding it if it's not in your main, because I do think there are things like Dragon Link, you know what I mean, that you can really punish with the card. But yeah, I definitely recommend having it somewhere. All right, so that's it for the main. 40 cards in the main. The real key there is really the Small World. Not everybody I've seen has been on the Small World build. They're on like the Prosperity stuff, but Small World is legit like guarantee Raisin, whereas Prosperity you still have to, you know, excavate 6 and see where you can go. But yeah, it's really good. All right, into the extra deck. Obviously 3 Rock the Vanquisher. This card's insane. This card is actually probably just the single best card in the deck, because it's a link 1 that +1s like every turn as a quick effect. So pluses you on your turn, pluses you on your opponent's turn. This card's insane. This card's legitimately insane. It also gives you the flexibility of being able to put like Raisin or Pantera into any column you want on the opponent's turn, which again, it's very good for setting up their column destruction effects and getting a good interruption. Card's just crazy. Card's actually insane. 1 Lingerebo. I just didn't want to lose to the Ibly, essentially. I mean, we have a generic links as well, but like that's still pretty bad to have to like normal Raisin and then get rid of my Raisin just to make like a fucking nightmare. That's terrible. So I'd rather just play this without the rank 7, the Diablosis. I shouldn't be worried too much about my opponent ripping my extra deck, so I'm not that worried about the Iblis shenanigans with just the 1 Lingerebo. Okay, a couple link 2s, just a couple removal tools. You have the Security Dragon, Phoenix, and Cerberus. I like Security Dragon for a couple of reasons. 1, it does not need a discard, and 2, it bounces. So versus certain matchups like Branded, being able to just straight up like bounce a Mirror Jade is pretty valuable. But these come up too. Like, yes, the pitch happens, but you're usually going to be co-linked under a rock, which means you are redrawing anyway. So that's pretty cool. And then you also get like stuff like the battle protection and destruction protection from them as well. So that can be kind of cool. But yeah, just basic utility stuff there. one unicorn as well. Still another good removal card, and then access code. Pretty basic like link tools there, nothing too crazy. There, I've never used access code, although I haven't played the deck long enough yet, so I'm sure it'll come up at some point. All right, this is where the extra gets a little bit spicy. One Baguska. This is not spicy. This is pretty standard. Everybody plays Baguska in this deck because if your opponent hits you in a certain way, you could still get Pantera out and then just make Baguska and just pass on that, which can be enough sometimes. This is where I really think is like a really interesting part about this build. Almost every single deck profile I've seen who talks about this deck goes, okay, here's my 3 rock the Vanquisher in the extra deck. I made Nightmare Phoenix once or twice this tournament, and then I made Zeus like 2 or 3 times this tournament. And then everything else is garbage. Don't even play it. None of it matters. So why even like why not just really lean into the fact that Zeus is one of the only extra deck cards that really comes up in your deck at all, and really make it like as powerful as it can be. So that's what I'm opting to do here, messing around with this idea of pretty much just facilitating a 6 material Zeus, which is very hard to deal with. So that's the idea, is like I just see so many people who just play the Chakanine and the Borbo, and then every time I see that, they're like, yeah, but these other Exceeds and these Link monsters literally never came up for me. They sucked. And I'm like, so why not play stuff that's actually going to come up? Whenever you make Zeus, why not make a 6 material Zeus instead of a 4 material Zeus? So that's the idea. I think it's interesting. I think more people should take a look at that and see if it's worth their time. Maybe with Prosperity it's not as worth, although I don't even think that's a legitimate excuse because you just banish the Tiger Mortar and the Hammer Kong and leave the original 3 that you use, but whatever. All right, that's it for the extra. And then for the side, I'll even show you what I have now. I have Kurikara and Doggeran. This should actually be a second Kurikara, but my buddy has my other copy. So this would be 2 Kurikaras. It's 2 more fires to add to your build. So with Small World and with just reveals, that's like a good attribute to have anyway. But right now I'm like essentially placeholding the second Kurikara with the Doggeran, which is fine. No real complaints there. From there we have the 4th Bestial, and this. So here's like, I'm missing some cards right now. I don't have a 3rd Bell. This would be a 3rd Bell, but DD Crow's a fine placeholder. Ideally, I'd like to have another Earth, but also just a card that's good versus Branded, and this is still like kind of in the same vein, but I think I'd prefer Bell overall. And if in a perfect world, this would be a 3rd Magnamut instead of a 2nd Druid's Worm. Magnamut's really cool because it can also search your Caesar Valius, and I even have another card here that's like really the spice of the extra deck, or I'm sorry, the side deck here, that I think is pretty cool. It's this right here. Triple Gobbly's a Phantasme, the Phantasmal Dragon. Fantastical Dragon Phantasma. Jesus, I have that backwards. Anyway, this card's really, really cool. This card has not seen play in a long while now, but I do think there's enough Link decks running around in the format. If you really look at everything that's like high rogue to meta, there's like 60 to 65% of the decks in there consistently Link summon every turn. And that's where I look at this card and I'm like, this card's kind of crazy. Not only is it a dark, so it's one of the attributes you like anyway, but it's a +1, and it lets you like fix your hand to have not only just a good hand, but find defensive cards, more hand traps. You already play a lot of hand traps in this build, or maybe a Kaiju to out something specific in like a Pirelli matchup. But although your Pirelli's not really Link summoning, so that's not like a bad example. But like at Ignister, for example, as a rogue deck, we're like, oh, okay, they're gonna make a Towers, but this card lets me dig to try and find one of my, outs to a Towers monster, which is cool. And really cool. I mean, just, it's so cool. It gives you the attributes you need. It gives you a body on field that's big and beefy. So versus stuff like Sprite, you already have a card that like threatens their board in the battle phase. I really think this card is cool. I really think it's worth looking at. I think it applies to a big enough portion of like what's decent in the metagame right now that I definitely recommend messing around with this card in this deck. It's all theory at this point. I haven't drawn this card enough to really know if it's like actually all the way there, but it's really, really interesting, and I'm curious to see if it's going to hold up. And it's searchable off Magnamut, which is really funny. Two Battalion, see, this card's cool. It's basically for mostly Runic decks, a little bit of Branded, and anything else with like summoning spells. But it's really cool. It's a Macrocosmos. It's a body on field, not only a body on field, but it's a 4. So you can Macrocosmos your opponent and then just like use it as a 4 to make a Zeus line on the next turn, which is pretty good. It's a cool card, pretty powerful, and this deck doesn't really care about macro Cosmos, so that's really good. 3 Cosmics, 3 more cards that kind of just double as not only hate for runic decks, but also kind of labyrinth stuff or anything else that might be leaving you some back row you really want to deal with. So that makes sense. 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, more of a blowout card. Cosmics are kind of 1-for-1s, but this card being able to like be a haymaker versus stuff like, you know, Labyrinth is pretty nice. And I played 2 D Barrier. This is the one slot I was like the least confident in the side, to be honest. I wanted something for going first. I feel like, you know, we're playing a hand trap build, so we're probably fine going first no matter what. You just, okay, I have a bunch of hand traps and my deck already does what it does and it doesn't commit to the board too much. We're not losing to too much specifically. But I did want like something that was strong enough, although there are a couple decks that just really don't care enough about D Barrier. So I don't know. I don't love it, but there doesn't seem to be like a complete generic enough option that like I really wanted to go for in this slot. So it's weird, but like it just is what it is for what I have at the moment, but it's cool. So yeah, there's my side, there's my extra, there's my main. This deck's really cool. That's pretty much the basis of this. I know this profile's probably been a ton overdone already. This deck's actually been performing better than I expected it to competitively. It's getting tops pretty consistently already. But I'm here for it, and I love the play style. This is exactly up my alley. So I'm gonna be messing around with it going forward for a couple weeks, months, whatever. And you know, that's where I'm at. So I'm out here for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, let me know your thoughts down below. Any ideas on the build, any suggestions for editing things. Like I said, the real big thing about this list is it's the small world build, not a prosperity build. And I think that leads to more consistent access to Raisin. Even if you have to -1 to get there, you're gonna plus so much after that anyway. It just is what it is. So yeah, I think it's worth it. But I'm out here for today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts. Subscribe if you haven't. You want to see more deck profiles down the line. I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.